The public is conditioned to watch the sky for missiles. This is a strategic error. The kinetic cost of a symmetric conflict is prohibitive. Adversaries have no incentive to match our military assets when they can neutralize them for a fraction of the cost. The vector of attack is not a loud, explosive event. It is engineered, systemic silence. According to analysts at RUSI and CSIS, the critical vulnerabilities are not our cities, but the deep ocean floor and low Earth orbit. Thousands of miles of subsea fiber optic cables act as the central nervous system of global finance. A few well-placed, low-cost submersibles can sever these choke points, functionally decapitating the data flow of entire continents. Simultaneously, a non-kinetic blinding of satellite constellations removes GPS and secure communications. The result is the blind Leviathan, a powerful, hyper-connected financial and military apparatus suddenly deprived of its senses. It cannot see market data. It cannot track assets. It cannot process transactions. The system's own crisis protocols become the weapon. Automated trading systems execute a launch-on-warning protocol, triggering a systemic solvency crisis and a catastrophic crisis of confidence. The ensuing deadly transportation chaos and global affordability crisis are not the attack itself. They are the predictable, engineered self-destruction of a system whose strength has become its primary liability. The pivot to asymmetric warfare is not an act of strategic genius. It is a declaration of insolvency. An adversary initiates this playbook when they can no longer afford the kinetic cost of a symmetric peer-to-peer conflict. The motive is not strength. It is a desperate act of leverage born from profound economic weakness. Consider the primary case study. Analysis from CSIS confirms the war in Ukraine rapidly became a critical domestic liability for Russia. The astronomical burn rate of munitions, armor, and personnel is unsustainable against a Western-supplied opponent. When a war becomes this unpopular and economically toxic, it is no longer a foreign policy tool. It is a solvency crisis playing out in real time. This weakness forces a pivot. A state facing a solvency event cannot match its opponent's force structure. Therefore, it must abandon the goal of winning a kinetic war and instead seek to trigger a systemic collapse within the adversary's own architecture. The new objective is not to sink a fleet, but to trigger a crisis of confidence. They weaponize our own protocols. The adversary calculates that it is mathematically cheaper to engineer a panic in our energy markets or supply chains than it is to build a single aircraft carrier. Weakness compels them to find the financial and political fracture lines, like an affordability crisis or transportation chaos, and apply minimal pressure for a disproportionate, self-defeating response from our own systems. The entire economic model of Western military doctrine is now insolvent. The math is irrefutable. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, lays out the raw calculation. A single main battle tank represents a kinetic cost of approximately $5 million. The asymmetric catalyst now used to neutralize it, a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a 1-to-1 ratio. It is a 10,000-to-1 cost leverage against our platforms. This disparity creates a solvency crisis before the first shot is fired. An adversary does not need a budget to match our pentagons. They need a budget to match our procurement errors. Every drone launched is a low-cost bet against a high-value asset. The defender is forced into a launch-on-warning protocol, expending multi-million-dollar interceptors to counter the $500 threat, accelerating their own financial exhaustion. Our defensive systems are now the primary vector for our own economic ruin. Analysts at institutions like CSIS identify this phenomenon as the democratization of violence. the state-level monopoly on projecting meaningful kinetic force has been broken. The capability to liquidate strategic assets is no longer firewalled by billion-dollar budgets and industrial bases. It has been decentralized to non-state actors, small groups, operating with commercial technology. This is not a future threat. It is the new, permanent operational environment. Strength has become a fixed liability. The battlefield is no longer a physical location. It is a network. The primary vectors of attack are now staged in what intelligence agencies refer to as gray zones, regions where systemic stability is intentionally degraded to serve as a proxy laboratory. Analysts at CSIS monitor these zones not for humanitarian crises, but for strategic opportunities. The increasing frequency of do not travel advisories, citing transportation chaos and entry bans, is a key indicator. This is not tourism advice. It is a signal of decaying state capacity, creating a permissive environment for staging asymmetric shocks. The blueprint is documented. Consider the proposed Venezuela raid scenario. The kinetic cost is minimal, but the objective is not territorial. The objective, as stated in MarketWatch analysis, was to deliberately trigger an affordability crisis back in the United States. This is the model. Use a low-cost foreign intervention as a catalyst to detonate a pre-existing domestic economic liability. These gray zone operations are designed to deliver a specific payload, a crisis of confidence. The target is not a carrier group, it is the solvency of the core financial system. As reports from AOL.com confirm, the Federal Reserve's own protocols have already created a vulnerability, a dubious history that an external shock can exploit. The gray zone is simply the trigger mechanism for a weapon we have aimed at ourselves. Legacy analysts who incorrectly forecast economic collapse based on partisan politics were observing the wrong indicators. The systemic risk is not political. It is mathematical. The next 12 months will not see a symmetric military escalation. Instead, expect a calculated solvency crisis triggered by an engineered supply chain failure originating from a designated gray zone. The math doesn't lie. Our crisis response protocol is the real target. The launch on warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a mathematical protocol, a timer. It was engineered to counter a decapitation strike, ensuring a retaliatory launch before our own assets are neutralized in their silos. The system assumes a symmetric, kinetic exchange. However, an adversary can now introduce an asymmetric catalyst, a targeted cyber attack. The objective is not kinetic destruction, but information denial. Blinding early warning radar systems creates a systemic data vacuum. This is the fog of digital war. The commander now faces a zero-sum choice, dictated by protocol. The system indicates a full-scale launch, but verification is impossible. Waiting risks absolute destruction. Launching risks global annihilation based on a ghost signal. The adversary has spent virtually nothing to force this decision. According to strategic analysis from RUSI and CSIS, our own crisis response protocol is now the primary liability. An adversary no longer needs a trillion-dollar arsenal. They need only to engineer a scenario where our own automated, high-leverage systems trigger our self-destruction. It transforms our greatest strength into a fatal, systemic weakness. The calibration shot will not be kinetic. There will be no missile launch, no overt declaration of hostilities. The target is not military, but systemic solvency. The vector will be a logistics node, a primary U.S. port, or a critical air cargo hub. Within the next 12 months, expect a 48 to 72-hour paralysis of a single major node. The official narrative will be cascading system failure or catastrophic software error. It will be meticulously engineered to be attribution impossible. This event is not designed for direct economic destruction. Its purpose is to gather data. It is an asymmetric probe to test our response protocols, to measure the exact point at which transportation chaos, as documented by travel warnings, translates into a crisis of confidence for Wall Street. Analysts at CSIS have modeled how such a disruption creates a feedback loop, turning our own just-in-time inventory systems into an accelerant for panic. The adversary observes, measures the political fallout and the financial overreaction, and calibrates the blueprint for a full-scale solvency attack. This is not a forecast, it is an itinerary.